something which chemists had missed before. There is a monoamine oxidase inhibitor, a built-in one.
And that inhibitor, and the effects it is known to have, could find a use in the treatment of psychological diseases. Discoveries like those of Professor Schultes hint that the beneficial effects of drugs whose use is forbidden in this country are potentially huge. Some of that potential, especially that pushed forward by the drugs we most detest, opium and cocaine, for instance, has already been realized. It is, however, hardly enough to weigh against the great harm of their abuses. Why then, in their different forms, can natural drugs be culturally and spiritually constructive in one society and devastating in another? How is it, for instance, that cocaine causes misery and pain in British towns, but, as William M. Bowden points out, comes from leaves that have an important energizing function in the Andes where they are grown?
Chewing these, you would get at most 1% of the leaf's dry weight as cocaine, and a quid or a wad of this would be chewed in order to facilitate migration across the Andes, because it was necessary. The people who lived on the seaward side of the Andes would have to trek across mountain paths that were above 14,000 feet, and they had to be very sure-footed. And they would do this while chewing quids of coca leaves, and they would carry great packs of coca leaves on their backs while navigating these very steep trails. We think of this as a pernicious drug. Well, it is, because the way we use it has nothing to do with their tradition. Their tradition involves a religion. It's also used as a measure of distance. If you say, how far did you travel today? You say 3 cocadas, and that's understood because that's how many times you had to put a quid of coca leaves in your mouth. So it tells you something about distance and time. It also figures prominently into a number of other traditions. But in our society, we've perverted it into something where cocaine is injected into the veins or it's snorted as pure extracted cocaine. So I think we mustn't confuse those traditions. One is a very important tradition that allowed a people to survive and to adapt and to assimilate in an area where they probably would not have otherwise. And it probably saved these people.
Folklore, to tales of a folklore that misinterprets drugs. And, at the last, to a plant whose effect we all come close to every day. Tobacco is as much of a drug as any of those that have pushed and jostled at the shape of our social history. And it is one, it seems, that we have misunderstood as violently as did the Victorians their opium, or, in John Allegro's eyes, the later Christians their pagan roots. As Rogan Taylor suggests, the awful medical and social problems that tobacco is known to cause may stem from a deep-rooted confusion, a confusion that began at the very moment of its discovery.
The very word tobacco probably originates from the Caribbean word for pipe. And so, you know, one can imagine the first arrivals in the New World from Spain and England and so on, jumping out of the longboats, rushing up the sandy shore, seeing local Indians smoking pipes, and of course Europeans had never seen anybody smoking anything before then, pointing to these pipes and saying, "What's that?" The Caribbean Indians presumably answered, "It's tobacco, it's a pipe." The Europeans then misunderstood that the substance inside the pipe was called tobacco, and it may have led to some quite interesting confusions. We do know, for instance, that some people in the Mexican world smoked hallucinogenic varieties of mushrooms in their pipes. But perhaps the more likely confusion is between two types of tobacco. There is a type of tobacco called Nicotiana tabacum, and this is the one which is smoked in cigarettes in the West. The other is Nicotiana rustica. Now, this plant is some 18 times stronger, I believe, in nicotine than the former. Now, Nicotiana tabacum, that is the weaker one, did not grow further north than the tropical lowlands of Mexico before the Europeans arrived in the New World. So it is almost certain that the early shiploads of tobacco would have been packed full of this extremely powerful form of tobacco. And this would explain perhaps some of the great fuss about tobacco which went on in Elizabethan and Shakespearean England, when it was perceived as a very powerful substance. And indeed, there are indications in a Ben Jonson play, for instance, where the young boy, who, if I remember rightly, is speaking to a character called Abel Drugger, describing his experiences in the tobacco shop, and he's saying, I've seen them smoking tobacco and I can take it too. And it sounds very much like beer, like something which you take and get drunk, something which a man can take and a boy can't, kind of thing. And it is also, of course, interesting that the Indians who were smoking the tobacco in the New World were only smoking it as an act of praise or prayer, or indeed a thank offering. Indeed, they were smoking it with respect. And it is the case that a number of North American Indians who were asked about the connections between tobacco and cancer replied, well, it kills you because you have no respect for it. That is, you use it in a ridiculous way. We have always used it in a ceremonial way. It didn't kill us. You have no respect for the plant, so it kills you. So that's an interesting angle on European smoking. We seem to have secularized, as we perennially do, a sacred substance, and the result of that is that it's become a very dangerous thing for people to do.
Rogan Taylor. We have then inherited drugs without their cultures, and cultures without their drugs. Our folklore, part of our history, even, some would dare suggest, our religion, are all dependent on chemicals that came from fungi, animals, and plants. We are, you could say, a drug-dependent society.
Dreamflower and the Toadskin Spell was narrated by Tom Baker, with readings by Elwyn Johnson and Barry Payne, and